With that sexy lipstick on. Get me all
Hello,
going.
everybody. Hello.
Hello.
James just always has to stir up trouble right before we go live. That's just how it is around here. But welcome back. We are very excited, and we're talking about plant medicine for the next hour or so. So I am curious because obviously everybody knows that James is a part of the recovery community. And so I was even like kind of treading lightly when I'm like, are you even cool with like being in a podcast talking about plant medicine? And I mean, I think you're cool with talking about it. You're sort of like encouraging towards me to have all of these experiences.
I'm trying to get you to get high all the time. Yeah, I am. I am trying to get you. Yeah. No, like just. I mean, full disclosure on my part. Yes, I am sober today. I'm 3.5 years sober today. But that I think there's kind of the stigma that for people in these programs, I try to be very cognizant of not naming the programs because they are anonymous. But I think there's a stigma that like we're like, like crusaders, like, drugs and alcohol are bad, and that's not the case at all. Like I love weed. I love trying to push you to smoke more weed because you're even more hilarious high. I think that weed is great for society. I think hemp medicine is severely overlooked. I think big pharmaceutical is very scared of plant medicine. I love psychedelics. I love doing them. I love the psychological benefits they can have for people. It's just for myself, really part of living this life is having that understanding that I cannot partake in it. And that's okay. And that's part of my life lesson. It's part of my soul contract to really understand that. And, I support it 100%. I totally support microdosing, people smoking weed. So have at it. I'm here to learn. I'm here to, pretty much be an exhibitionist. So bring it on.
And when I told you that I was like, I like really want to do ayahuasca, like, and then you were like, hey girl, slow down. Let's maybe start you off with something small and lighter. And I'm like, you know what? Like, I kind of feel like I almost would have like sort of like a psychedelic experience midwife, because I feel like because you are from the recovery community, in some ways you have seen everything. So you could be like, girl, like that is a no-no. This is okay. We're just going to steer you over here. And so I feel like I never had those experiences because I was sort of like, the good girl. And then we talked about this being the age of giving less fucks. So now I feel like entering into my late 30s, I'm just like, like what have I been conditioned to think about these things that maybe it pushed me kind of away, right? And I think that we both go down the rabbit hole of like Gaia and other kind of spiritual programs. And I think that it's definitely sparked more and more of a curiosity. And it's definitely made me very aware of that there's definitely been a very strong narrative around what things are and how they're portrayed in media to almost like kind of keep, this obviously is just my opinion, like the public away from some of its power. Because personally, like if we look at things historically, I think kind of governments and those in power sort of want people to be controlled, right? They don't want people to think too deeply or to like ask too many questions. And I feel like even with just like my relationship with like cannabis, I feel like it is something that is connecting to nature. It's something that sort of opens me into a space of flow, like being able to take something into my body that's at that vibrational frequency that's come from the earth. And as soon as I noticed how much my intuition expanded and I dropped in when I was already doing these readings, that it's sort of like almost heightened these abilities, it really just made me wonder like how many things might be unlocked to even like kind of kickstart that relationship with sort of self or intuition or nature or flow with just sort of others in society. So I feel like that's really my curiosity about it, like why I'm bringing it today.
Well, I'm not super huge on conspiracy theories. Not, you know how I get about it. Like sometimes you start in and I'm like, okay, so the gas company out in front of your house really actually that's a story for another time. But I do really believe that, unfortunately, there's money to be made, and big
Mhm.
pharmaceutical does not really want us to tap into what nature provides, both medically and psychologically. And a disclaimer though, like if you find yourself obsessed with plant medicine or psychedelics, you may have a problem. So I also, want to mention that that's the reason I cannot partake. It does kick off the obsession in me, and I will get lost
Mhm.
fully in it. But I think for people like you, as we call you, normies, I think it's beautiful. I think the psychological benefits behind shrooms, even ecstasy, not the kind that's so like chemically induced, but the more naturalistic way, like there's big psychological like benefits to it, spiritual benefits to it. Like ayahuasca, I know tons of people that had amazing experiences with it, so I'm all here for it. I think that, especially in America, there's money to be made. I mean, the truth is most of our diseases
Mm.
are curable already, folks, but there's money to be made. So I'm really interested to see the guests that you found, to hear what they have to talk about, and to push you to do more drugs. And I will be your midwife. I will be your midwife. I'll give you Vicks to sniff while you're all fucked up, and I'll watch out for you the pulling hair too. So I'm here for it.
It almost will be kind of like role reversal from like our friendship spanning back
Well,
pre-recovery for you.
just please don't leave all my shit out in front of your door and tell me to leave. My bad, Ashley.
Oh, the adventures of our
So
year-long friendship. Okay.
let's
Yes.
talk real quick about like you and weed though, and like your journey with that, because there was the stigma that you picked up from society that, if you smoked weed, you're a bad girl or you were lazy. So let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. I think what I noticed from us when we stepped into this podcast is that it made me very clear of what my edges were, and like what I would notice I would like hold back and not talk about. And then I looked at that, and now I'm like, wait, I live in California. Like I go to this place that looks like the Apple store with it's very interesting as well, being in those places and just like seeing the variety like of such a diverse group of people, man, that really do take part in, I don't know, these different forms of cannabis and weed and CBD. Who knows what they're buying? But I noticed my hesitancy to talk about it because I think that I think people in my family that I was just like, what's my mom gonna say? Like, who am I gonna offend? I have a business. Like, am I gonna like take it too far with any of my clients and just like totally weird them out? And then I realized that none of that really belonged to me. Like, I think even you hearing me say that, you're like, that doesn't align with me or what I value. And so I think I just ripped off the Band-Aid.
your business is lead with your magic, and you think your clients can be like, oh my God, you smoke weed? Like, I'm out. Like, yeah, I think it was a big society put a big, stamp on it. Like, this is naughty, this is bad, this is taboo. And I love watching you step into it. I a lot of my friends that smoke weed don't want to hang out with me, not because I'm sober, because I do push more weed on them and indulge them in more edibles and try to get them to smoke more weed. And I gotta relax with you. I realize that because I love Hi Ashley. She's even more creative and fun and weird. So I'm here for it. I know that's not necessarily the topic, but I want to say I'm here for it. Please smoke more weed.
Well, if you think about, we talked about the Grace and Frankie show, and that I was like very much the Frankie Lily Tomlin route, where with age, I think I just get more and more weird and out there. And I think I'm even maybe on a more accelerated path. So, I mean, who knows where I'm going to end up?
So I'm fucking great. I'm Gracie. Cool. I'm Gracie. Is that what's going on here? I don't know if I'm hip with that.
It's okay. It's not about that. But okay. I definitely just have this desire to even like bring in, I feel like I'm still like new, like I'm really curious. Greg, our first guest, he like actually will do integration ceremonies, like after people do ayahuasca, he'll tell us, or maybe other things for them to like either deepen their experience, or maybe if there was something that didn't make sense for them to maybe have a different relationship with it. And so I just think it's really fascinating. And I think I'm sort of like, I'm like kind of showing up to topics like this and knowing that I'm wanting these experiences. And it's sort of like, I feel like I'm almost like planning my future vacation, maybe to Peru, to sort of, I don't know, work with a shaman and come back and have a session with Greg. Because I just am so curious, like, you know, what people are utilizing this for, like what he's seen in terms of what's been released and what's been healed. And then I know that our second guest is more in like the CBD, more in like the cannabis world, like around the legalization of it. I really want him to talk about the U.S. patent on cannabis, which I think is pretty interesting since it's still federally illegal. So that's interesting, right?
Because there's money to be made, sister. There's money to be made, and this is again. I will get on a high horse about this, but let's bring the first guest in. Let's talk about it.
I'm trying to honor his time because the thing is that like I tell people like, okay, we'll bring you in at 5:15, and I want to be respectful. I don't want to just like pounce on Greg and have. What if he's like having a snack or like a pre-show like iced tea or something, and we just pull him in unexpectedly? That would be,
a pre-show iced tea. We're talking about plant medicine. Like he's having a pre-show iced tea. Like
I don't know what he drinks. But anyway, so I'm gonna actually pull in a few comments here because there's people watching and they're starting to sort of like chime in with sort of like, I think, their relationship to the topic. I had somebody like offline like be like, oh my gosh, I've utilized ayahuasca. I'm so here for this topic, and I've utilized it for like microdosing for healing. Let's see, Lamont is saying he's very sober, but he doesn't judge other people for partaking. He's like, if it does help you and it doesn't destroy your life, I say go for it.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously having like a spiritual community separate from people that might be sober or recovered. I think that even people that are like spiritual purists, they're very much like, you know, it's just vibrational and that only gets you to a certain level. And I feel like there's sort of many paths, and if that's their path, like great. And if someone else is feeling this like strong intuitive connection to some other kind of plant medicine, great, you know. So I just feel like no one needs to be on a spiritual high horse around sort of, you know, if something's like spiritually great enough, you know. So Vanessa, she was saying she's a micro dab.
Yes.
Every day. I learn my personal dosage that helps me stay relaxed and functional. Okay, yeah.
I don't know if I can allow you to start. Have you tried dabbing yet? I don't know. I don't
even know what that is. I just thought that. Wait.
I mean, I've had some good times dabbing, and then I've had some meltdowns dabbing. I've had
somebody needs to get me a dictionary because I just felt like, oh, dabble. Like it's a micro version of dabbling in something.
Dab,
and I'm like, that's a cute word.
We need these guests to educate you. It's not,
okay. All right. Let's just bring in Greg because I'm
dab.
I'm going to bring you in, Greg. You're muted. Hello.
Yeah, I think there's been a mistake. I'm here for the podcast, so I kind of walked into someone having fun. I'm pretty sure I'm in the wrong place.
We'll try to get more serious. Sorry about that, Greg.
All right, thank you. I would appreciate that.
Welcome, friend.
Thank
you. Hi. I would love for you to share with people what you do. Just a little bit about your role as this like psychedelic, you know, integration coach.
Psychedelic integration itself is helping people to take the lesson from their experience and integrate that in their daily lives. How I do that is I work with people before an experience. Mm-hmm. So I'll talk to them about how to surrender, how to let go, how to navigate, stay grounded, breathe, what to do if things get scary, because that's a very important piece to all this. Basically, how to get the most out of the experience. Afterwards, we'll talk about what happened during the experience, because psychedelics don't always give us words. You know, you and I have defenses built up against words. If I don't think I'm deserving of love, literally everyone in the world can tell me I am, I don't hear it. So psychedelics don't just hold up a sign saying, hey, you deserve love. They work around that. So they use story, metaphor, pictures, sounds. They might scare us or elate us. They might show us our life from a detached perspective. And they'll use symbology a lot of times. So sometimes things happen in a psychedelic experience and the people who experienced it aren't sure what it meant. So you kind of have to help them suss out the meaning, the theme, the lesson, that takes some knowledge of how personal psychology affects the psychedelic experience. And then, all right, so I've got that lesson. What am I going to do now? So I will use techniques from cognitive behavioral therapy, neurolinguistic programming, and a wide variety of personal and spiritual development practices to help people create new and drop old habits, patterns, ways of thinking, to make shifts or changes in their lives. You know, a small shift in your life can lead to a profound change. And to me, the psychological and the spiritual kind of intertwined. You know, you have to get rid of the baggage that we've gathered from the time we were born into this incarnation in order to elevate yourself spiritually. So they're all part of the same thing. So basically, I help people figure out what happened, and then what are we going to do with that? What are we going to do now? What are we going to do on the ground? How are we going to make a change in your life? I'm there to help them, coach them, advise them in that process.
How did you get into this, Greg? I'm just like really fascinated by all of it.
It's a complete accident. No, it was like, I got a flyer in the mail. I sent in. I got a diploma. No, it was like 7 years ago. I was living like a suburban life, so I got mixed up in hard drugs. I did psychedelics in my late teens, mid to late 20s, and then I got mixed up in hard drugs, and I pretty much spiraled. I was at the bottom of the barrel when, luckily, I got yanked out. I went cold turkey. I moved away from where I lived. I managed to get away from drugs, and I quit doing everything except for cannabis, which I abused for like 20 years. And then about 7 years ago, my life got turned upside down. The person I was married to at the time died suddenly. And so I'm in grief, and I realized at that time I've got a lot of childhood trauma I hadn't dealt with. I started seeing a therapist and a coach. And then, someone reminded me about psychedelics. So I started using them. And I had a couple of experiences, and I thought, wow, now I see what's going on, so everything's going to be changed. And in about 3 to 5 weeks, nothing had changed. That's what happens sometimes if you don't do something with it. It feels different in the afterglow, but then in a matter of days, weeks, months, you get back to where you were. This kind of goes back to what James was saying about people going back to plant medicine over and over. Sometimes that's because they don't do anything with it afterwards, so they think that the experience is the thing. Oh yeah, when I was in an experience, that felt great. If you do something with it afterwards, you don't have to keep going back if you extract something from it. If you don't, sometimes you end up going back over and over again. There's a saying that says, if you don't integrate, you're having a one-time experience over and over again. I discovered the process of integration. I went to some integration circles. Those are safe spaces where people ask questions and talk about their experiences and do research. It's basically a place to build community too. It's a safe space. I eventually started leading those circles. I was doing some energy work at the time. I realized I was doing some coaching because people were saying, hey, I really like what you said about this. I went and got some training in coaching. And then one of the integration coaches I work with said, hey, can I refer clients to you? I eventually got certified as an integration coach, and I started working full-time as an integration coach a little over 2 years ago.
You're curious about something, James. I heard you.
You just sound like you totally had a Michael Singer experience where the universe just kind of took you step by step, and I just love that. But I'm really intrigued that you did say you're abusing cannabis, and I would like to hear your perspective on that for a minute, because I do watch a lot of people. I love weed. I love people that smoke weed, but I do watch people get to the point where they abuse cannabis. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Well, I remember watching, so I smoke cannabis every day. I smoke cannabis when I woke up. Sometimes at night I'd fall asleep watching television, and I'd wake up and smoke some cannabis before I went to bed. I just was, one thing I didn't realize, I don't know if you've seen Graham Hancock's TED Talk on the war on consciousness, but he says at one point that I had a 25-year cannabis habit, which basically means I was high for 25 years. Now, when he said that, I thought, oh my God, I've been high for over 20 years. So I just stayed high. I can remember a couple of times like running out for a few days. And then when I got high, I'm like, wow, I'm really high. No, it was just that I wasn't unhigh before.
So it's almost to the point where it's not enjoyable. It's like any addict. I was trying to stay in that state. I wasn't here and trying to get here. I was just trying to stay here. Okay. I love that you clarified that. I love that.
Addicts don't like to sit with themselves and their minds and their consciousness and their memories and their feelings. That's why most addicts are addicts, is I probably don't have to tell you.
Yeah, you don't. But I love that you clarified that, because again, like, weed can be a beautiful thing. And I feel like I'm being like such a purist right now, but it can get to the point where you're extracting yourself from life instead of letting it really highlight life. So thank you for saying that.
It took about 2.5 months for me to realize that I had finally gotten unhigh. Like, wow, there's actually a difference in me now when weed is not coursing through every cell in my body every moment of the day. I love weed. I don't use it as much now. I use it occasionally. I use it more intentionally. But yeah, I could tell the difference when I finally kind of detoxed after over 20 years.
Nice.
Yeah, and I'm curious for those that are seeking. Well, ayahuasca is the one that I just know. Like, I mean, can you maybe tell us some other options or things out there? Because I am very uneducated on like what else people are doing these days, I guess.
Well, first, since you are on recovery, I don't know if you're familiar with ibogaine. Ibogaine is a tryptamine that is extracted from the root of a bush native to West Africa, the iboga bush. Now, there is a spiritual discipline in West Africa practiced by about 300,000 people called Bwiti, where they use iboga as a part of their rituals. And it is, an 18 to 36 hour journey that can be very arduous and hard on the body. If you're going to use this, you actually have to have an EKG and a liver test, because if you have a certain cardiac condition, liver condition, you're taking certain medications, you can die taking ibogaine. But when ibogaine is used in clinics in Mexico and Canada, because it's illegal in the United States, of course, it is used to treat opioid and heroin addiction. And with one treatment, after 18 to 36 hours, people come out with no withdrawals and usually with no desire to use substances again. A lot of that is dependent on aftercare. You can't just go back to your old environment, because with ibogaine, there's a lot of neuroplasticity. Your brain's ready to make new neural connections. So if you go back to your old environment, your brain says, oh, we're doing this again. With correct aftercare, where you're taken out of your environment for a month, 2 months, maybe 3 months, the rate of success using ibogaine as opposed to regular treatments in the United States is double or more.
Wow.
So it's a phenomenal substance that is actually used to help people get on. It's a drug. It's used to help people get off of drugs. It's really a plant medicine. But ibogaine is extracted from iboga. Now, probably one of the most well-known uses of psychedelics right now are the government-sanctioned clinical studies being done by MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. They're using MDMA to treat treatment-resistant PTSD in veterans, and having phenomenal success. They are in stage 3 of those trials now. If this stage of the trials is successful, then MDMA-assisted psychotherapy should be a prescribable treatment, probably sometime in 2021, 2022. Wow. There have been clinical studies that help people with end-of-life anxiety. Saw a very touching documentary with a woman who had cancer, and she said, I'm going to die and I'm ruining my relationship with my children and my husband because of my anxiety. So they showed her going into the room, putting on the eye shades and the headphones with a guide. And the next scene was a scene of her son giving her eulogy. And he said, from that day on, she loved every second of her life right up until the last one.
Wow. That just made me really emotional, because I feel like there's so much like beauty. There's so many experiences for people. Do you have a perspective on maybe why we've been sort of pushed against it, even though it's our lineage in terms of, like, I feel like ancient cultures have been using it. Why have we been pushed away from it, from your perspective?
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that these drugs were almost all made Schedule 1, which means they have no medical use and they are addictive, which is absolutely provably false. And then at the end of the 1960s, around the time of the Vietnam War, I personally know people who took LSD on the battlefields, not while they were in battle, but on the battlefields in Vietnam, and then suddenly said, why am I over here killing people? People were taking LSD and burning their draft cards. You can't have a capitalist country like this, consumer society, without a functioning army of at least pliable soldiers, if not willing soldiers. As you said, you cannot control people who are in touch with their own consciousness, who are introspective. And, this is a consumerist society. Since the 1920s, advertising agencies have figured out that they make people buy things by emotional connections. There was a guy named Edward Bernays. This was actually the nephew of Sigmund Freud, who figured out that you don't just show people and say, hey, our car's bigger and it costs less. You say, hey, how would you feel driving this beautiful car? That people buy for emotional reasons. He started using stereotypes and propaganda. And eventually studies came out saying that unhappy people make better buyers. So this society is not set up for people to find happiness. Sexually free people, sexually responsible people can't be controlled. But then people are together and they're happy. So we have stereotypes of the war against men and women, or when you back it up from a non-heteronormative perspective, the war between partners. For men and women, men want sex, but intimacy. Women, it's different. There's the honeymoon period, no matter who you are. As soon as you get to know each other, things are going to get bad. As soon as you get married, your sex life is over. All of these stereotypes and falsehoods that are fed to us to keep us apart and keep us unhappy. Making plant medicine and psychedelics illegal is part of that whole scheme, if you will. We're not put here in this country. We're not designated by the people who run this country as people who are free to explore their consciousness, to be free and to be happy and to survive how we want. We're supposed to be part of the system and buy things and do what they want us to. It's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how these things are run. You can't have an army where people say, screw you, I'm not going to kill people. I'm not buying your stuff. I'm going to stay here and make love with my wife because we're very happy together. None of that works for the way that this whole system's put together.
You're kind of blowing my mind in the best kind of way, Greg. And I love that you come on with plant medicine and you're so well-spoken and educated, because like we were talking earlier about stereotypes of spirituality, and that's kind of why we started the podcast, that people that are into spirituality are crazy and kooky and they're witches and they're insane. And here you come on, you're educated and know what the hell you're talking about, and you're blowing my goddamn mind, man.
Well, we need people like Greg that look very kind of conservative and white collar and corporate, because then people already believe that. Don't believe Greg.
Put my tie on.
But Greg, just real quick, some of the people that you've worked with, can you just, without blowing any kind of disclosure, like some of the traumas you've helped people get through, people that you've seen really recover from past traumas or anything like that you've really seen plant medicine be really effective for?
Yeah, I should say that there are times when someone will have a very strong and profound experience with psychedelic or plant medicine and change. I make my bed every day. I'm less impatient in traffic. My depression's down. Most of the time, what happens is people have an experience, and there is a significant. All these clinical studies I mentioned have a significant therapeutic component on the front and back end. So a lot of times, when the gains are made, they're made after the experience. So psychedelics don't necessarily fix us. They show us what needs to be worked on. Then it's up to us. That's where therapists and coaches and accountability partners come in. So the things I have seen in the aftermath of an experience are people who've gotten over OCD. There was one guy I worked with who, one of his biggest things was he could not let his wife load the dishwasher, even if he watched her, because he would be up until 3 or 4 in the morning until he went down and checked every dish himself. So he had to load the dishwasher. His life was hell because of things like this. He now throws the dishes in the dishwasher himself and pays no attention to them. People who overcome depression, anxiety. Some of my favorite things are when people say things like, I realize that there's not really a problem. I'm fucking things up the way I think about it. I just think there's a problem. Those are my favorite kind of things. When I realize that the problem is not that I'm anxious, the problem is that I'm worried about being anxious. And I spend all my time up here worrying about this thing. That's a big thing I teach people, that we have these layers of neuroses we build on real problems, and they're not real problems. So now I'm anxious and I'm worried about being anxious. So I spend all my time worrying about being anxious. I never deal with the anxiety and I never feel it. People feeling their feelings afterwards is one of the biggest wins I see from people, because we are trained from birth not to be mad or sad mainly. So, if people take mushrooms, there's like an 80 to 90% chance they're going to cry, because everybody has tears stuffed inside of them that about not let go. One of the greatest things plant medicines do during the experience and afterwards is to let go of suppressed emotions. So sometimes people say, well, I had this great experience, but I feel really shitty for 2 days now after I took mushrooms. I tell them, that's great. Write it out. Feel it. Don't try to feel better. Don't take 5-HTP or try to go in the park or listen to nice music. Let yourself feel shitty for a while, because you've earned that. It wants to get out of you. You know, we're not made as storehouses for emotions, but that's what we do all our lives. Emotions have a beginning, middle, and end. You know, they need to be experienced. We get them to here, and then we say, whoop, that's enough. I don't feel like doing this right now. And then we stuff it in this closet. And after a while, the door is shaking because the closet's full and it needs to get out. And people are wondering, why am I stuck? Why do I procrastinate? Why do I feel so, why do I have a bad attitude? Why do I have trouble connecting with people?
Yeah, I feel like when those denser frequencies and vibrations are released through the emotions, like it leaves like this open space. And I feel like people probably do really up level or sort of at times go through like a rebirth of seeming like they're actually able to become maybe something that wasn't possible before with all those things they were carrying around. So that totally makes sense. It does make sense. How can people find you if they want to start maybe going on a journey like this and work with you maybe before an experience? Are there any like groups that you have on Facebook? I know we'll drop your links in the comments and in the show notes, but any places that people can find you?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook as Psychedelic Integration Specialist. My website's psychedelicintegrationspecialist.com. Psychedelic Integration is my Instagram. And I do have talks from time to time. I've done talks on microdosing, the guided psychedelic journey. So if people follow me, they'll see that we have some public talks. And I do some relationship teaching with my wife, too, who's an author and a psychotherapist.
Ooh. Well, I hope to be your client one day, Greg.
You're absolutely welcome. You'll get the friends and family discount.
I hope Ashley is your client one day.
You're a good friend, James.
Aren't I? But Greg, thank you. Like I honestly am quiet because you've given me so much to digest. So thank you for coming on and being so forthright and educating the shit out of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you both. My pleasure.
Bye, Greg. Thank you.
Bye. Talk to you soon.
Oh my gosh. So I'm excited to bring in Peter, but like this topic I feel like is like so much more powerful than I even imagined. So I'm going to pull in Peter to the stream, our next guest, Peter Holden. Hey, Peter, how are you? Oh, you're muted, Peter. Let's unmute you.
Almost. Yes.
Okay. We're good. We're good. Hey, Peter.
Hey, guys. How are you? That was, I caught the last like 15, 20 minutes. That was really fascinating.
Extremely fascinating.
Yeah.
So nice to meet you, Peter. Welcome to the round table.
Thank you for having me.
So I know, Peter, I tapped you because you were more on the cannabis side. I know that you have a company that is related. There's a lot of CBD products on there. And I was like, okay, let's talk like cannabis, because I feel like that's something that we're starting to see in some states, at least depending on where you live, starting to be legalized. So can you tell people just a little bit about your background and what really interested you in this topic?
Yeah. I've been involved in the legalization movement since ¡96. My first experience with pot was before that. They were when I was back in middle school, high school. I grew up in Oregon, and in Oregon, the two things is pot and beer. Right? It's like growing up in Bordeaux, France. Wine. It's the same thing with growing up in Portland. And my younger brother became a grower. So by '96, he was a master grower. Was one of the first guys growing medicinal up in Oregon when it legalized medicinally up there. And so over the years, as he was kind of running his business, I helped business manage for him, helped trim and stuff, learned the science from him and his other master grower, Todd, just basically to get free pot, to be perfectly honest.
Attaboy.
I've been an actor for 30 years, so that's been kind of the side gig while acting's my main gig. And then when full legalization happened, we started working on a farm up in Oregon, and the industry got really funky. The prices dropped. We've got, which I'm sure we'll get into as far as like the legalization and the issues nationally with that. But kind of realized that until you can move stuff over state lines, it's gonna be very difficult for growers, no matter how good the quality is, for them to legitimately, make a living, make any money. At the same time, I started doing a lot of research on CBD, just as a and the hemp-based CBD. And that's what really got us kind of moving in that direction, particularly with the website, and realizing I'm a huge believer in THC as for its medicinal properties. Never really knew a lot about CBD until I kind of got into the research, and realizing that CBD is nature's probably best anti-inflammatory, and it's an anti-inflammatory on a cellular level, right? So it's actually unlike, for example, steroids. If you're taking steroids, which if you need them, they're great, and they work as anti-inflammatory, but they also over time degenerate the cells. The cells they're there to treat are being broken down by steroids, whereas CBD is exactly the opposite. It's regenerative. So as you're taking CBD, you get the anti-inflammatory, but then you're also getting the cell health is improving. And then when we started getting into the research with CBGs and the other cannabinoids, what the research is showing for what they're doing for Alzheimer's patients, Parkinson's patients, and it's somewhat from the same idea, is that it's not only is it bringing down inflammation in the brain, which is what like Alzheimer's, as for example, does. The capillaries inside the brain starts to swell and starts to pinch off and damage the circuits, right? Well, CBD, it's not a cure-all. None of these are cure-alls. But it not only takes down the inflammation, but it also helps with regenerative growth. Not necessarily at the same rate that Alzheimer's can, particularly as it gets more advanced, can degenerate. But certainly all kinds of studies are showing that it's slowing it down. And so when we started getting into that, I decided that our website was going to be, we couldn't sell pot online, but we could sell CBD online. And so when and all this research was convincing me it was the best option for us. And then we had an experience. My brother, who was my partner, I kept saying, dude, try this stuff, because I started getting samples and stuff. But one of the things that we do, that Holden Farm CBD does, is every single product that we have on there, we triple batch test independently, because there is no testing regime in the United States, for actually anywhere in the world really, for certifying whether it's real or not. And when we went for our first batch of companies to try and look at companies who were, we needed people who could supply and could do the business side of actually getting the product to us, not a mom and pop in their kitchen figuring out how to do it, but the actual legit companies. Out of 60 companies that we tested, only 7 passed our triple batch test.
Wow.
So everything from you get these products in, you test them, and let's say they say it's 500 milligrams. Well, you test it and it's got nothing, or it's got 5 milligrams, or then you have inconsistency. One you have 100 milligram, and one has 150, and the next one has 25. Or again, it's just terpenes, doesn't have anything else in it. So, which was fascinating to me, and I realized that was for us. That and the science was incredibly important to me. If you go to our site, we've got a science page, which actually I think it's the most traffic on our site by a long shot. And we've got every NIH study regarding to cannabis or CBD broken down by the different conditions that people have, and really try to make it easy for people to get the information. And God gave us a miracle gift. But what convinced us to go forward was literally over a 1-day period. My brother, who just refused to try this stuff, I kept sending him samples saying, give a shot to this. He's like, dude, I smoke pot every day. I don't need this shit. I've already got it in my system. And I just said, just fucking give it a try, man. I mean, stop being a dick and try. And one day he was really complaining because he from an injury when he was younger, and he's been swinging a hammer, and he's got really bad arthritis, particularly in one hand, right? And he was coming home cold, and his hand was just like a claw, like it couldn't move. And when he'd get like that, it would take him 6-7 hours to be able to move his hand again normally. So he just goes, well, fuck it. There's this 1,000 milligram flower child stuff we've got. Let me just give it a shot, see what happens, right? He puts it on, not thinking anything of it, then realizes 10 minutes later his hand completely moves, and he hasn't been able to do that in 15 years when it got like that. Wow. So he's like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. Then later that day, my niece, who was born with psoriasis, she's got really bad skin problems. Mm-hmm. And they've done everything. They went through all the different products to try and help the clothes she was wearing or whatever, try to keep it down. And they did a great job, diet, all that stuff. But there were 2 spots in the back of her knee and the back of her neck that never went away from the time she was born. And she would wake up, poor kid would wake up just bloody from scratching. Right? So my brother, and let's see, Stella was, I think, 8 at the time. It's a couple of years ago. He has this stuff in his hand. He's like, well, apparently works for let's give it a shot. It's not going to hurt us. Let's put it on the back of her neck and put it on the back of her knees before she goes to bed. And, what the hell? See what happens, right? Next morning, she woke up for the first time in her entire life. It completely cleared up.
Wow.
Completely cleared up. And then the last one of the day was my grandmother, who was living with him at the time, who was losing her memory. I mean, she had, couldn't remember 10 minutes from 10 minutes. She gets gout occasionally, right? And she was complaining about her toe, and her toe, she had a gouted toe. It was all swelled up and cracking and ugly. So Matt goes, well, shit, this stuff's worked. Let's try. Let's just see what happens. Nothing we have in the science. No one's ever tested gout, but what the hell? Let's try it. So he puts it on her toe, puts the sock back on, comes back an hour later and says, Grandma, how's your toe? She's like, what are you talking about? He's like, well, your toe's hurt. So how's your toe feeling now? She's like, my toe's fine. I don't know what the hell you're talking about. Pulls the sock off, and literally the swelling's gone. The gout, it's gone. So needless to say, that day my brother became converted to the CBD side of things after that.
I have a question while we have you here. I definitely will make sure that we're dropping your site in the comments and putting it in the show notes so that people find their way to check out all this like magic that you guys carry. Like, I feel like it's feels magical.
We're just going through the science. The science is interesting.
I love magic though, so to me.
Let's go that way.
It's fun. I was like, men want science, and well, I guess women do as well. But sometimes, like, nature is magical. God damn it, nature is magical.
Peter, don't press back on the magical, right? It's a trigger for her.
Man. Your previous guest, Jeff. I mean, I was listening to that, going, those mushrooms, those magic mushrooms, are no shit. I mean, they are magic.
Yeah,
they've been magic throughout my life.
Tell me this, Peter. I was telling you that I was curious, is there a U.S. government patent on cannabis, or maybe some use of cannabis? Like, is there truth to that? And what can you say?
Well, what there is there's attempts at patenting isotopes, right? You can't patent a plant. That you cannot do, but you can patent an isotope. So you have companies like Monsanto and the major big ag companies have been working for the last several years to try and isolate a genetic specific isotope that they can patent and then sell to other pharmaceutical companies, beauty companies, whatever. And there's a couple that have patents pending. The problem is that with cannabis is a very interesting plant. It's actually somewhat like a tomato, in the sense that it is a constantly evolving genome. So let's say, for example, I'm assuming you guys may have smoked a little pot in your lives. Let's say you have some killer green bud. That was the stuff when I was growing up that was like the best shit you have, KGB or sour diesel or whatever, right?
I actually smoked it 5 minutes ago.
Some sour diesel? Good stuff. Good stuff. I've got some train wreck I'm going to be smoking as soon as we're done here. I may light up before we're done. I'm just being honest. But so the plant itself is constantly evolving. So if you get sour diesel from one batch, you're not getting the same sour diesel the next batch. It's even if you take you're seeding off those same plants, the basic RNA of the plant changes over time. Each successive growth. It's also one of the reasons why it's very difficult to patent the seeds, because it also happens on the seed level. So the seeds themselves, like Monsanto, the biggest money they make is selling desexualized seeds to farmers, right? Ones that are just female only. Well, you can't manufacture cannabis seeds the same way you would corn seeds or soy seeds. They just don't. They won't maintain. You'll still have males. Nature prevails. It will combat what they try and do to alter it. So going back to the isotope and the idea of patenting, yes, they are trying to patent those isotopes, but they're just not successful. A, and B, what also every study is finding is those isotopes, which is the only way they could patent it, are not nearly as effective on any level as whole plant. So if you take pure CBD and you get it down to its basic isotope, that CBD pure is not as good for you and will not be as effective as a CBD that you extract from whole plant. The cannabinoids need each other. They need the trace level other cannabinoids to activate themselves. THC is the same way. If you ever had when you get what are they fucking the tar stuff you smoke. I can't think of the name of it.
Oh, is it like the salvia?
Having a dab, getting a dab. Yeah,
right.
Oh, this is coming back again. Word.
My girlfriend Ashley here. Okay, she is still, a mom of two. She thought it was dabble. She thought people were dabbling.
I'm like micro dab. I was like, is that mean like kind of like you're dabbling, but like on just like a small level? Like, I mean, I'm naive still. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but when you smoke the dab, I mean, it fucks you up without a doubt. It's like pure THC, right? Yeah. But you're not getting any of the other properties. And if you notice that it doesn't really the dab will have very different effects than if you smoke a joint or if you smoke a bowl or and the other ways that you smoke it. And part of it is that it's also not nearly as effective because you basically extracted out the stuff that makes it whole plant.
So Peter, I know we're coming towards the end of it, but I just had a question since you've been around for a long time with the whole legalization of it. What really do you think is the core? I mean, I think history has proven that weed isn't necessarily evil or bad for society. What do you think the whole struggle with the legalization of weed has been at the core of it?
There's two issues: money and racism. Money, from the sense that look, up until 1928, every pharmacist in this country gave out, one of the things that they'd have in their pharmacies were cannabis tinctures, was cannabis. And that was given for up to 60 different ailments, everything from menopause to headaches it was always used. The biggest crop that George Washington had was a mixture of cannabis and hemp, right? So it was constantly used, and it was in our diets too. Hemp seed was used in everything. Hemp milk was used in everything. In the year after it was illegalized is the year that Bear aspirin hit the market.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Mm-hmm. You've also got an issue of Monsanto not wanting to compete with something that they couldn't control. So the big ag didn't want to do it. And then you had Dow Chemical that created nylon rope, right? So in the 1930s, it gets illegalized. It gets completely illegalized because Dow Chemicals and the two guys who owned it happened to be senators, got it illegalized so they could sell nylon rope to the Navy. Well, the war happens, and these nylon ropes were snapping all over the place. They're not nearly as strong as hemp ropes, and that's why FDR carved out the hemp exception into the law, specifically so that they would be able to supply the Navy with frickin' rope, right? So then we kind of skip forward to a few years after the war, and they wanted to again financially make it unfeasible for marijuana to exist, even though every doctor was showing that it shouldn't be illegal, and so they decided to scapegoat blacks and Mexicans. For example, marijuana is not a word. Marijuana is not actually a technical term. It was marijuana. It was basically to make it a Mexican thing. And the reason why Mexicans and blacks smoked pot as opposed to taking tinctures is because they could grow it in their backyard and it was cheaper. They could get the same medicinal benefits without having to go pay the pharmacist for it, or having to pay somebody else for the tincture for it. So those are the two reasons why it stayed illegal. And then Nixon in 1969 did his Blue Ribbon Commission, basically to finally prove the war on drugs and prove that pot should be Schedule I. It was terrible. He put all these incredibly conservative doctors and researchers together to tell him why this is terrible. They all came back and said, not only should this not be Schedule 1, it should be sold over the counter. And so Nixon promptly put it in his desk and never released it. Because big companies wanted to keep it illegal. And because of his Southern strategy, he wanted to make sure that blacks and Hispanics were being disenfranchised. So that's actually the kind of the history of the legalization issues for black.
I feel like between the two of you, I just got like schooled in the best way. So thank you for all the education. I know we're going to throw your website up there, but real quick, on a side note, I know you're an actor. Where have we seen you before, Peter?
Well, if you IMDb me, you'll see a few there. Not that in Social Network, Kurt on Goliath. I've done about 100 movies and TV shows.
Okay, nice.
Ooh. Well, thank you so much for teaching us all about this today. I feel like I learned so much, and I don't know if there's probably going to be something that I'll tap you for in the future. Maybe we go deeper on this topic. Specifically, I think James as well, like the issue of like racism and sort of like how many people might be in prison right now for, possession or growing marijuana. I feel like that might be like a thing that we go deeper in the future. So, but yeah, thank you for opening your eyes to that.
If you ever get into the idea of racism in the prison system, yeah, I mean, you look at that. 25% of blacks that go to jail went to jail for pot. There's a very easy way to put blacks in jail.
Yeah,
and for minor, tiny amounts of it. And if they actually expunge that records, it would be tens of millions of people will be expunged or released from prison because of expunged. There's not that many in prison, but they would be out of prison now.
Well, thank you, Peter, for opening our eyes
to people.
With everyone listening. But
thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
And we'll drop Peter's here. Thank you. We'll drop Peter's info into the comments. We'll put it in the show notes so that you can take a look at Holden Farms and all of their CBD products and the science page for those of you that need the science more than the magic. But yeah, that's really, I feel like both of those men just really brought it tonight in terms of the things that my eyes were opened to. And I think Greg actually showed you as well. Like maybe you needed to hear it from a man. Just kidding. But I think that he really drove home some points that I think that was what I was really seeing as well. Like what are you?
Hold on. I want you to clarify on what you mean by that, my friend.
The whole thing about it being a conspiracy theory, because it's like, I feel like sometimes it's like, oh, these are conspiracy theories. And it's just like, well, let's wait a minute. And I think sometimes if people explain it in a kind of sciencey way, I think I just bring a little bit of vibrancy and a little bit of drama maybe to how I'm explaining things with my intensity. But yeah, I feel like some of the things that are labeled as conspiracies, honestly, I think even the word conspiracy theory was created by the CIA as a way to discredit people, to be to kind of shut people up, so that people stopped talking about things that they didn't want them talking about. And so that's all. I'm being a little sort of goofy with you and sort of playful. And
I know, but I just want to make it clear, you and I have had the conversation before we started this podcast that, spiritual people were made to be crazy, and conspiracy theory does exist and even going back to aliens, because I'll always bring it back to aliens, that if people believe in aliens to make them look insane, or if you get too deep into spirituality, if you talk about other realms, you're cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. So I've always believed that, but when people try to make everyday nuances or the reason that society is not gelling a conspiracy theory, that's when I'm okay, it may be a little bit more simplistic than that. Maybe the human connection that we're missing. But I love both those men, just educated me so much. I'm going to have to listen back to both of it. But I'm so thankful that you brought them to the round table. That was amazing. When are we going to schedule you doing mushrooms?
Should we just broadcast that live? We're just
I was gonna, can I film it? I mean, is that okay? Can that be our fans only page instead of like sex and have you on mushrooms, or no? Think about it.
Oh, so funny. Well, we do have some upcoming topics that we wanted to just sort of like, we're going to plant some seeds of our upcoming topics at the end of today. We're talking numerology next week, which is the 16th, right? And we're talking about past lives, or maybe even sort of lives between lives, and how we even maybe choose or have some choice.
Return to source and the scouting of what our next experience is going to be.
Mm-hmm. And then All Hallows Eve, which is on the 30th, the day before Halloween. And that's going to be a podcast party. I've coined that term, and we're doing like readings. We're trying to lure Grey Wolf back. I don't know if it's going to be him, but we definitely want someone that's a medium, or somebody that can potentially sort of do some readings live, and we'll do a little bit of like play with like tarot cards and just celebrating things. But yeah, today was really fun, and follow us like on our actual sort of podcast as well. If you guys are listening here, it would help us if you guys subscribe, whether you have Spotify or we're on Apple Podcasts now, to like go on your phone and subscribe and leave us like a short review, because that's going to help people find us. So we could really use your help with that. If you guys watch today, if you're watching now, if you're listening on your phone, any closing thoughts for you?
I'm just really thankful that we did this topic, because even though I may not partake, it's really great to be educated and to have the knowledge and the resources for people that may need this experience in their life. You know, I think that you can benefit greatly from one of these experiences. I think most people can. So even if I can't partake myself, they just both beautifully explained a lot. So thank you for bringing that to the round table. And I'm excited for the next few weeks. So I hope people will drop comments and choose to join us and offer themselves up as guests or other guests. And yeah.
Well, bye, everybody. Have a good weekend.